Benjamin Franklin wrote, "They who would give up essential liberty for temporary security deserve neither liberty or security." What does that say about the American people who seem willing to give up their right to control their government in exchange for internet access? We'll look at this next on the Constitution Study.
Love the neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution, teach rising generation be free. Glad you could join me today. It's a question of taxation, of legislation, of where power really exists. And it came up in a case, FCC versus Consumer Research. Now, if you want to get to the details, go to constitutionstudy.com and look up this article. I've got links to all my source material there. I'll talk more about the website and other ways you can support the work we're doing here at the end of the episode. But for now, let's look at this question of trading rights for internet access. The case in question is Federal Communications Commission et al. Versus Consumer Research et al. And it questions if Congress unconstitutionally delegated their power to a third party. Now, to understand the situation, we need to go back to the creation of the FCC. The Communications Act of 1934 established the Federal Communications Commission and instructed it to make available to all the people of the United States reliable communication services at reasonable charges. Look in the Constitution all you want, you will not find the power to ensure people have reliable communication services at any price. No, the General Welfare Clause does not cover it. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 reads, "The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States." So the General Welfare Clause only allows Congress to collect taxes, not provide services. And Congress can only collect taxes for three purposes: paying the debts, the common defense, and the general welfare of the United States, capital U, capital S, a proper noun. This law was not for the general welfare of the United States, though, but for certain people, mostly rural and the poor. The problem with this legislation goes on. The Universal Service Project arose from the concern that pure market mechanisms would leave some population segments, such as the poor and those in rural areas, without access to needed communication services. Under the 1934 Act, the FCC pursued universal service primarily through implicit subsidies, using its rate regulation authority to lower costs for some consumers at the expense of others. Congress was concerned that the market would leave some population segments without communication services, except it's not Congress's business to make sure everyone gets the services congressmen think they should. That means the Communications Act of 1934 is an unconstitutional act and therefore void. From the Supreme Court, Kate Norton v. Shelby County. An unconstitutional act is not a law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. It affords no protections. It creates no office. It is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Furthermore, Congress claimed to give the FCC the power to regulate telecommunication rates and to use them to subsidize communications for their special interest groups. Then in 1996, Congress upped the criminality of their act. In 1996, Congress amended the Act and created a new framework for achieving universal service. Section 254 of the amended statute requires every carrier providing interstate telecommunication services to contribute to a fund known as the Universal Service Fund. Now, Congress is requiring a tax on interstate telecom providers. They may call it a contribution, but that's the same trick the mafia uses for their protection rackets. So now Congress is telling the FCC to extort money from telecommunications providers and what to use it for. Now, guess who actually pays for this alleged contribution? We the people, and our phone and internet bills. The FCC must use the money in the fund to pay for universal service subsidy programs. The statute designates the beneficiaries of universal service subsidies low-income consumers, those in rural areas, schools and libraries, and rural hospitals. So Congress tells the FCC to collect this illegal tax, then to spend it for something Congress is not authorized to spend money on. Things keep getting worse. Section 254 also sets forth principles on which the FCC shall base its universal service policies. Section 254B. Among other things, those principles direct that all consumers, including low-income consumers and those in rural areas, should have access to quality services at affordable prices. Again, providing communication services is not a power vested in the government of the United States, so Congress had no constitutional authority to write such law. And if that weren't bad enough, the terms quality services and affordable prices are not defined. It's up to the FCC bureaucracy to do that. The FCC has appointed the Universal Service Administration Company, a private, not-for-profit corporation, as the fund's permanent administrator. As if that weren't bad enough, the FCC hires a private company to administer this distorted funding, which brings us to the case itself. The case that came up before the Supreme Court comes on appeal from the Fifth Circuit. Consumers Research petitioned for review in the Fifth Circuit, contending that the Universal Service Contribution Scheme violates the non-delegation doctrine. The en banc court granted the petition, replacing a panel decision to the contrary. Once again, we have a case based not in a violation of the law, but of court precedent. Consumers Research did not claim that this scam violated the law, but the court's non-delegation doctrine. In the federal government of the United States, the non-delegation doctrine is the theory that the Congress of the United States, being vested with all legislative powers by Article 1, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, cannot delegate that power to anyone else. However, the Supreme Court ruled in J.W. Hampton, Jr. and Company v. United States from 1928 that congressional delegation of legislative authority is an implied power of Congress that is constitutional so long as Congress provides an intelligible principle to guide the executive branch. The problem is that the Constitution doesn't deal with implied powers, but with vested powers, as the necessary and proper clause states. Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Since the Constitution vests Congress with the power to lay and collect taxes, this delegation of the power seems to violate the necessary and proper clause. In the full Fifth Circuit's view, the combination of Congress's delegation to the FCC and FCC's subdelegation to the administrator violated the Constitution, even if neither delegation did so independently. So if the Fifth Circuit found the scheme violated the Constitution, what was it based on? Article 1 of the Constitution provides that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, Section 1. Accompanying that assignment of power to Congress is a bar on its further delegation. Now, at the same time, this Congress has recognized that Congress may seek assistance from its coordinate branches and vest discretion in executive agencies to implement the law it has enacted. Now, to some extent, this position is correct. Congress lays the taxes, but the IRS handles the collection. However, there is nothing in the Constitution that allows Congress to delegate lawmaking power to the executive branch, much less those powers be eventually delegated to a private company. In addition to joining the opinion, Justice Kavanaugh wrote a concurrence which Justice Jackson joined. This case presents a narrow but important non-delegation question. May Congress authorize the Federal Communications Commission to determine the monetary amount sufficient to fund certain telecommunication services, which in turn is the amount that telecommunication carriers must contribute to the Universal Service Fund? Applying the long-standing intelligible principle test set forth by this court's precedent, the court today upholds that congressional delegation to the FCC. Can Congress authorize the FCC to lay taxes? To me, that's an obvious no. Can the FCC then delegate the administration of those funds to a third party? That would be a hard no. I join the court's opinion and write separately to make 2 points. First, I will briefly outline what I understand to be the background and rationale behind the intelligible principle test that the court has long used to assess congressional delegation of authority to the executive branch. So Justice Kavanaugh wants to dig into the intelligible principles test regarding the delegation of authority. That's fine. But he also makes a point about the delegation to private entities. Second, I'll explain why congressional delegations to independent agencies, as distinct from delegation to the president and the executive agencies, raise substantial questions under Article 2 of the Constitution. Kavanaugh's second point involves the delegation of power to independent agencies, but Kavanaugh only appears to see an Article 2 problem. Rather, the problems with delegation to unaccountable officials primarily arises from the delegation to independent agencies. Independent agencies are headed by officers who are not removable at will by the president and who thus operate largely independent of presidential supervision and direction. Those independent agencies are not elected by the people and are not accountable to the people for their policy decisions. Unlike executive agencies supervised and directed by the president, independent agencies sit uncomfortably at the outer periphery of the executive branch. Although this court has thus far allowed such agencies in certain circumstances, they belong to what's been aptly labeled a headless fourth branch. Kavanaugh's problem with these independent agencies is the fact that they don't directly report to the president. That fact alone has constitutional issues. Congress is not authorized to create agencies outside of federal oversight. If they do not operate under the executive branch, where does their oversight come from? Justice Gorsuch filed a dissenting opinion, joined by Justices Thomas and Alito. Within the federal government, Congress alone has access to the pockets of the people. This is from Federalist Paper number 78. The Constitution affords only our elected representatives the power to decide which taxes the government can collect and at what rates. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Throughout the nation's history, Congress has almost invariably respected this assignment. As the court observed some decades ago, it would represent a sharp break with our traditions for Congress to abdicate its responsibility and bestow on a federal agency the taxing power. Okay, Justice Gorsuch seems to be making a similar point. Congress, and only Congress, has the power to determine what taxes to collect. Even the Supreme Court recognized that giving a federal agency taxing power would be a break, although Gorsuch claimed it would be a break from tradition, not the law. Today, the court departs from these time-honored rules. When it comes to universal service taxes, the court concludes an executive agency may decide for itself what rates to apply and how much to collect. In upholding that arrangement, the court defies the Constitution's command that Congress may not transfer to another branch powers which are strictly and exclusively legislative, from Grundy versus United States. So the court departed from these time-honored rules, but what about the law? Still, things could be worse because today's misadventure sits unmoored from surrounding law. I have reason to hope its approach will not stand the test of time. What law? Because I would find actual legal citations a lot firmer foundation for Gorsuch's dissent than the history lesson devoid of legal foundation that he provided. Once again, we not only see the court placing its previous opinions above the supreme law of the land, we see them rewriting their own doctrines to support their preferred outcome. Held, the Universal Service Contribution Scheme does not violate the non-delegation doctrine. Remember, according to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, all legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. So only Congress can legislate, make law. But when Congress created the Universal Service Funding Scheme, they violated Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution. The Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Now, ignoring this little problem as the court did, we come to the non-delegation problem. While Congress can and in fact must have the executive branch put into execution their laws, that does not include delegating to the FCC the power to determine tax rates, which is done via legislation. A law violates the traditional non-delegation doctrine when it authorizes an agency to legislate. Furthermore, when the FCC allowed a private entity to administer the money collected, it also violated the non-delegation doctrine. A law violates the private non-delegation doctrine when it allows non-government entities to govern. This is why decisions of the Supreme Court are not law, much less the supreme law of the land. They are not law because only Congress can make law. Furthermore, the court is not an elected branch of government. Also, they are not the supreme law because that would mean the United States is not a republic, but an oligarchy ruled by 9 justices in black robes. And this case shows just how corrupt the federal government has become, ignoring their oaths to support the Constitution and making up rules to get their way. How can we call ourselves the land of the free if we keep following these oligarchs? This universal service program is simply another bribe from the Washington, D.C. Sadly, it seems to be a rather popular one. Listen, no one likes paying taxes. So when you get your phone bill and you see that little line for the Universal Services Contribution, well, nobody likes it. Of course, most of us don't even bother looking at it. We're happy to say, hey, I get phone service and high-speed internet and all this stuff, and it doesn't cost as much as it used to. That's because you're paying another way. You're paying through your taxes, or you're paying through the taxes collected through the telecommunication companies, but you're still paying for them, just in another realm. And what happened to the idea of equal protection of the law? Why do poor people get their telecommunications at one rate and everyone else at another rate? Why should a rural person pay less than an urban person, even if it costs more to implement the service? This is a basic violation of rights and liberty. It's a violation of the Constitution, and the court got it wrong. Because the court didn't look at the Constitution and said, does Congress have the authority to collect a tax through these companies? A direct tax on these companies? No, they don't. It's got to be apportioned. Do they have the authority to tell the executive branch to collect these taxes? I mean, you call them contributions, they're still taxes. The answer is no. Do they have the authority to take the payment of money collected via these fake taxes and have a third party, a private company, administer them? No. Is this a violation of the non-delegation doctrine? Yes. So why couldn't the court find that? Apparently they like the program. It's what happens when you put our future not in the hands of elected representatives that we the people can fire, but a handful of oligarchs who think they know better than everybody else. Supposed legal geniuses who apparently can't bother reading the law. Now, if you want to find out more, just head to the website, constitutionstudy.com. You can find this and other articles with all my links to all my references, so you can double check my work. You can also head to the store. There's a button on the website, and you can purchase a book or a mug or a t-shirt, or just donate to the cause. All of it goes to keep the Constitution Study up and running and to keep bringing this content to you. Nobody takes a salary. Nobody gets paid. We pay to put this stuff on. You can also support us with, well, your cell phone. You see, Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They support organizations that are trying to defend our rights, not those that are trying to destroy our rights. Now, sure, you get great 4G and 5G coverage on the same networks and towers that the major carriers use. Their customer support is 100% US based. So what's the difference? A portion of every dollar is used to support organizations that are trying to defend your rights. NRA, Folds for Honor, even the Constitution Study. They also support the sanctity of life, veterans, and first responders. So use your cell phone to help defend your rights by going to patriotmobile.com/constitution, find a plan that works for you, and then don't forget, if you use the code Constitution at checkout, you'll get your line activated absolutely free. So yeah, use your phone to protect your rights. So yeah, join us here at Patriot Mobile. Go to patriotmobile.com/constitution, find a plan that works for you, and don't forget to use that code Constitution at checkout, get reactivation, and do so today. Now, I hope you like this content. I hope you'll share this content with friends and family. I hope you'll bring a few along next time when we meet here for the Constitution Study.